Hitting record. All right. And welcome to Happy Hours for May 1st. So we have made it to spring. I still have my cold, so you're welcome to that voice. But it is getting better. So first off, just how goes your project?
Good. Lots of thinking. I'm still thinking. I know.
Thinking is good. Thinking is required.
It's because the dragons chapters, especially in this second part, were very weak. And so there's a lot of new stuff that has to be developed. And I'm making lists and lists and lists of what could go wrong. And then I'm going, no, that's maybe a little too wrong, or that'll take the story in the wrong direction. So I've been doing a lot of that. I also tried to write a query letter.
Yeah.
And yeah, because sometimes that helps. You have to put the stakes down. But yeah, I got a little frustrated. So I will be sending you an email about that.
I will look forward to that. So that sounds good. So actually where you are, as well as a couple other people that I've been talking with, kind of motivated me for today's topic.
I like motivated.
Motivated, which is, and I'm propping this up so I can see it easily, how do you know when you're done?
Never.
Don't jump ahead. Okay.
Sorry, I gave the conclusion.
Yeah, stop that. So I think people come into kind of like there's plotters and pansters. I think there are kind of two different people around finishing manuscripts. So one are people who are done probably too early. And then the second are people who maybe take too long. So the too early people, it comes from, I think, just this overwhelming relief that you've crossed the finish line. And some people, and it depends. Like some people, when they finish a manuscript, they're like, this is genius, right? Some people finish a manuscript and think this is total crap. It kind of tends to go one way or the other. But when it is like, I think this is genius, I think there's a real temptation to hit send or publish if you're indie publishing, just because it's done.
They don't want to ruin it.
Yeah, like let's just be done, right? Yeah. So in those cases, I really think you need to give your work a break. And I think ideally is kind of 2 to 4 weeks. And for some people, that's really hard. They want to keep going. But taking a break is really, really useful. So I would definitely encourage taking a break if you can. And particularly if you haven't gone to the step of getting any feedback. Now, if you're the person who's never done, one of the things to keep in mind is that you could always keep revising. And I think one of the hardest things when you do publish, if you're not indie published, so if you've traditionally published, you can't just say, oh, now I know how to make it better and take it away. Like the publisher has already published it. So anyone I know who has traditionally published, with books that you did earlier, now you can think of things you would do that would make it different or better, or I wish I could change this one thing. So you are trying to kind of find that balance between making the book the best that you absolutely can and obsession.
What if you're both?
That's the fine line. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So first off, with revisions or edits, I put be aware that I don't know anyone who writes one draft and is done. She's going to stand. I was like, she's leaving me. She's standing. So one draft and done. So most people, you kind of need to write a couple of different drafts. And I think you need to go easy on yourself because you can't fix a blank page. And the story on the page is never as good as the one that was in your head before you started writing. And that for me was one of the hardest things because I would have this amazing idea, I would start writing, and then I would become crushed because it wasn't very good. So understanding like revisions, the whole point of it is to make the thing better.
Yeah.
So the example that I often give, and if you've heard it before, a la Bonnie, just patience for this next moment. But if you haven't, I actually think it's useful. So darn it all, I'm saying it. So to me, it's sort of like if you watch those home and garden shows where they're doing kind of renovations on places. So if you go into a place where there is massive problems, so there are cracks in the foundation and the bathroom is spewing sewage and the kitchen counters are, cracked and falling off, then those are the things you have to fix first. And it's only once you fix those things that you start noticing, like, oh, like this whole place needs a new fresh coat of paint. And, oh, I really need to knock this wall down to open this thing up and make it better. And it's only once you do kind of those round of things that you start noticing, like, oh, the baseboards are really dusty. And, oh, this needs to be cleaned up or tightened, or this drawer is squeaky, those kinds of things. So revisions to me are the same way. Like, oftentimes people say, can you read my manuscript, give me notes, and then it'll be done and perfect.
We wish.
Yeah. And I wish I could. Like, that would be way more efficient for me. And it would also be way more efficient for the individual, but it doesn't usually work that way. The problem is, of course, once one thing gets corrected, then you see and you do something else. So just understand that revisions is usually a multiple process. One thing that can help a lot is reading out loud. And I don't know if you do that, Bonnie, if you ever read your pages aloud.
I've done it with the first chapter, but yeah, it's been on my to-do list to go through and just one second.
Of course. So I'm just going to talk about why doing that is useful. So reading out loud is helpful for a few reasons. One is you'll see and kind of hear things that you don't see when your eyes are kind of skimming across a page. When you're actually forced to read it out loud is when you'll often notice, like, that sentence is really, really clunky, or, wow, I just said the word look 5 times. Hang on, I'm going to cough. Someday I will be done with this cold. I have faith. So reading out loud, I think, is one of the better things that you can do. And you will catch so many more things than you will catch if you are just reading it on the page. I also really recommend actually reading off print paper instead of just the computer screen can be helpful as well. Welcome back, Bonnie.
Hi.
I'm going to cough. Hang on.
Yeah, a friend of mine uses the text to speech.
Yes.
To have it read it out to her. And she has different languages that she uses, which is really cool because sometimes your manuscript is just not fabulous in the right language,
Yeah.
in the right accent.
Everything sounds better with the British accent, in my humble opinion. But yeah, reading out loud just lets you catch those things. So one of the things I have created, which I will send out end of this week because I'm making it all fancy, and right now it's not fancy, is an edit checklist. And the idea behind this is just to create kind of a rough list. Hang on, I'm going to cough.
Okay.
There we go. Is to create.
You got your voice back.
Yeah, I was like, I can do this. I just need to like hack up a lung bit there. So the revision checklist is hopefully kind of starting with big picture things and then moving to, again, smaller dust on your baseboard kind of stuff. But just a way of sort of checking yourself, like, have you covered some of the major story elements?
Yeah, because revising the small ones is not going to do you any good if
you miss the big ones.
Yeah.
So it kind of gives you some things to ask yourself and questions for yourself. And there's kind of 8 different areas and usually about 5 or 6 questions under each area. So I'm getting this all made up kind of super schwanky. And that will become something that's in our free resource room. And of course, it's always open to all the member people.
That'll be great.
But that is something that you can kind of keep in your back door and have with. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was getting feedback. So one of my questions for you, Bonnie, is how do you decide who to ask to do a beta read for you?
Well, originally I joined an online group and I did it through there. They had a monthly, well, I guess it was every 6 weeks, they would start up a new beta group. But I found that there were too many different levels.
Yeah.
of readers, and so some things were helpful, but some were just not, because they weren't either at the same level as me, or they were maybe too advanced and I didn't understand what they were talking about.
Yeah.
So I actually now just send it to one person to catch the big picture stuff, and I hired you for a less revised version of a manuscript. I don't know what I'll do in the future. I think beta readers are incredibly important for pointing out, oh, you did this part in your science fiction world, and in this part, that's utterly impossible. But I think I learned a lot at the beginning because I didn't know structure. I didn't know goal, motivation, conflict. I had so much to learn. It was incredibly helpful to have critique partners and beta readers. But now it's more, I've always been a work by myself sort of person.
Yeah.
So now I need to work through what I need to do. And then when it's at the stage where I feel I've got it, that's when I need the feedback. So as for finding other beta readers, I haven't quite figured that one out. I'm hoping you have some insight.
I'm so glad you asked. Yeah. So, I mean, what I would say first off is the decision that people have to make about when to get beta readers. And I, similar to you, I don't like people to read my stuff until I feel like I'm basically taking it as far as I can. And that's partly because I am very vulnerable to somebody hijacking my story. So if someone's like, oh, you know what you should do? I start thinking, oh, maybe I should do that. And that's maybe not what I actually need to be doing. So for me, to get my story down is really important. Other people I know, they're a part of a critique group, and they are asking people to read kind of as they go, and they're getting feedback kind of each step of the way. So there isn't a right or a wrong way, like for clarity.
No, you just have to figure out what works for you.
You just have to figure out what works for you. But if you're finding it difficult, my hunch is that you're letting people in too early.
Right.
Because I don't think I'm certainly alone in that vulnerability of being like, oopsie, I'm going to do all that. So think of things to do. So who to ask? So ideally, I like to get more than 2 people to review if I can. Because that way, if you have 3, then you have a thing. If one person's like, I absolutely love your main character, and the other person's like, I found her a whiny bitch.
Right.
Then you have a third person who's a tiebreaker.
Yeah. Well, she was kind of whiny sometimes. Okay.
Yeah. No, I don't want that answer. Damn it. I want something in between. Someone once asked me, like, can you have too many beta readers?
Oh, I think you can.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, what a lovely luxury of a problem to have. You have too many people who want to volunteer to read your manuscript. But I do think you possibly could get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Where you just had too much coming in. So there's kind of a few different people you can ask. So the first is asking other writers. And there are pros and cons of that. So I definitely am asking fellow writers, partly because in part that's who my friends are. I am friends with other writers. So I'm asking them to read. And the benefit is they, again, depending where they are in their personal journey with writing, they're usually pretty good at identifying craft problems. So they'll say things like, I just don't feel like your character's motivated enough for what's going on. Or your pacing is really struggling here, and I think you've got too much narration.
Right. So it's really good for learning.
It's really good for learning. The challenge I think it is inherently hard for writers to read someone else's writing and not start playing the game of, what would I do if this was my book?
Yeah.
So that is something.
We all have great ideas.
Yeah. Like, oh, you know what you should do? Like, you need to change. You need to have rotating point of view. You need to start with this.
It would be so awesome if they did this. And
yeah. And by that, I mean awesome because I think that would be a really fun story that I would like to write.
Yeah.
Versus like the story you're trying to tell. So that is something to be aware of when you're asking other writers. Big benefits in asking people who are not writers, but who are readers of the genre. Particularly people who are passionate about a particular genre. So If you ask a romance reader to read your romance, they have read, no doubt, hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of romances, and they will be able to tell you probably better than someone who might be a writer but writes science fiction, like, hey, you're hitting a lot of cliches.
Right.
Or, by the way, that's been done 1,000 times, or this is not kind of the expectation of the genre. And all genres do have expectations. So that is something that I think sometimes if you know people who like to read a certain thing, asking them to do it. When I started writing YA, one of my critique partners, Joelle Anthony, she was like, you are aware that basically it's a cliche to have a red-haired YA character? Like,
yeah.
They all have red hair. And I was like, oh, like I thought I was so clever, right? Like, oh. So I think sometimes those genre readers often will spot things that a writer may not necessarily see. The downside is they may not know what's actually wrong.
Yeah, but
because they
point you in the right direction.
Yeah, they can at least say it like this. The biggest thing is you are trying to ask people who will be honest. So this doesn't mean that it's not okay to ask your mom. You can ask your mom or your spouse or whatever, particularly because sometimes we really, really want to hear a nice thing.
We need it.
We need the nice thing too, but it just can't be your only source of feedback. So where do you find them? Well, one, if you're going to conferences, if you're hanging out with, other writers, cultivating a group of people where you offer to swap manuscripts. Because at least what I find for me is I am now fortunate enough to have a lot of writer friends, but they're all at different times with different manuscripts. So I may approach one person and be like, do you have time to do a read for me? And they would love to do it, but they honestly don't. They're on deadline, or they have something going on in their family or their work life, and they simply can't read. So having kind of a stable of people where you can, ask a group of different people kind of lets you spread the joy out. Because one thing to be aware of is you are actually asking a fairly big ask.
Yeah.
Like to read someone's full manuscript is a fairly big commitment of time. And if you are actually asking them to comment on it, that's even a bigger commitment of time, right? Because that's not just, flipping through it. That's making notes, trying to figure out what's working, what's not working. So just to be aware of that. You can be directive with feedback. So I know some people that when I finish I read their manuscript and then they send me a list of questions. So it'll be things like, in the beginning of the book, did you find the character complained too often? Did you? And it's interesting for me. They send them the questions after, which I think is probably good because it doesn't bias me as I'm reading.
Yeah.
But then I go back and kind of answer those questions, particularly if you have things where you're like, I'm not sure if the point of view of the dragon is working really well, or I'm not sure if the middle is getting too bogged down in backstory, or I'm not sure if the ending was satisfying enough given everything that happened. So if you have specific questions, that's really useful. Again, this isn't, you're asking a favor, so be careful who you ask, but are they willing to kind of make comments directly on the manuscript? There we go. A little cough break there.
Yep.
Because what I find is I have done some where people have said, where I've just read the manuscript, but then I get to the end and my feedback is much less specific.
Yeah.
Versus if I'm reading with track changes open, I'm much more likely to flag something and be like, this is awkward, love this, FYI this. Whereas, here's a whole big section of repeated words. Whereas if I'm waiting to the end, it's much more general. Like I saw a lot of repeated words.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's maybe not as helpful, but just to be aware that that's going to be, again, more work. And if you're asking people who are readers, not writers, they may not be comfortable with track changes.
No, I think if with readers, you would ask more general, like, did you like the character? Did
Yes.
this seem reasonable? Was there any point where you said, that can't happen.
Yeah. Or you might, like, sometimes with readers, I have printed off a manuscript and asked them to kind of pencil right on the paper. Like, if there's something you really like, put a plus sign, or if there's something that's confusing, put a question mark, or, mark where you got bored, or, so that will sometimes give you a little bit more specific than, again, if you wait to the very end. So what do you do when you give your manuscript to someone to read and you don't hear back from them? Have you ever had that, Bonnie?
No, but I expect I will.
Yes, it does often happen. It can be really discouraging. So sometimes the person will get back to you and they're like, I know I said I would read. I'm just really swamped. I'm going to get it to you next week. And then next week you're not hearing. And so you're like, emailing again, like, hey, did you read my manuscript yet? And that can be frustrating because you're trying to move forward with revisions and changes, or you might be on deadline. And it also then feeds that inner insecurity that, of course, the reason the person's not emailing you back is because they hated it and they just don't know how to tell you.
They got bored and they just stopped reading and they just don't want to tell you.
Yeah. And that may be the truth. But here's the thing, that's okay.
Isn't it so good to know that?
Yeah. Like, at some point, I think you just have to fish and cut bait. Like, if at some point someone has not gotten back to you, just stop asking. Like, it just becomes a point where you're going to have to then get someone else to do it. And really, it's no different than, you've asked someone to come out and fix your backyard fence. And the worker's like, yeah, I'm going to be out today. No, I got busy today. I'll come to, like, sooner or later, you'll hire somebody else to fix the fence.
Definitely.
It's pretty much the same thing with the manuscript. Again, I talked about trying to cultivate and make friends with writers and have a nice big stable of people who will read my manuscript. The benefit of that is, again, if you want to do round 2. So I've polished the manuscript as well as I can. I've gotten people to read it. They've given me feedback. Now I've made fresh changes. One, it can be asking a whole lot to ask those people to come back and read it again. Some people will because they're really invested. But it's also really nice sometimes to have fresh eyes. Like, that's one of the things I encourage. When I work at SFU, I have students for 10 months. So I've been working with them, month after month after month. But I often tell them, like, you're way better off to get somebody fresh to look at this manuscript now, because I'm bringing all of the stuff I already know to a read. So I'm sometimes missing things because in my mind, it's still in the book.
Yeah.
Even though it's maybe no longer on the page. So getting someone with fresh eyes can be really, really helpful. So that is something. So where to find beta readers? Conferences, classes. If you belong to any writing association groups, there are a fair number of, like, a lot of the local libraries have writing groups. So that can be a place to go to. If you belong to, Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, or the Science Fiction Association, or Sisters in Crime, like, a lot of times those are places you can be going again and be getting really good information. So that can be useful. Again, asking librarians, like, is there someone, if you're writing YA, if there's a local high school, I've actually approached the school librarians and said,
okay.
I'm a YA writer. I'm looking, like, and I'd be happy to thank them in the book, down the road, kind of thing. And they love that stuff. I mean, writer beware, teen readers have an opinion.
Oh, yes. They're not going to hold back, right?
Yeah, they will not hold back.
Okay.
If you're in a book club, you might have people, again, who are readers in your book club. And so people who like certain kind of books, so that can be someone to ask. Libraries, again, may have book clubs. So you may say, like, do you know if there's anyone who likes to read murder mysteries? I'm looking for a beta reader. If it's someone you totally don't know, it's probably nice to do, like, a candy bar or, like, a thank you card or something. Because, again, like,
Chapters gift card. Obviously, they love books.
Yeah. Something to thank people, because, I get asked a lot where people say, oh, can you read my book?
Yeah.
And I feel bad when I'm like, no, or you could pay me and I would. But it's literally just is a time thing. Like
Right.
for me to read, for example, 20 to 50 pages, if I'm doing it to critique, takes me a couple of hours. This is not reading for pleasure where I'm just, whizzing through the book. This is me slowing down and paying attention. And that's 2 hours that I could be, in theory, doing my own writing and or accomplishing something that I need to do. So the next one, and I'm just telling you this right off the bat so that you don't freak out, has nothing to do with you. But I get asked this question, and sometimes people want to know the answer, which is, how do you know if you should just give up on a book altogether?
Oh, Eileen!
Yeah. This is not you, Bonnie. It is not you.
Oh, thank you. Now I know.
Yes. I didn't want you to get off and be like, was she trying to tell me something? Because that is exactly what writers do. This is a very deeply personal decision to make about whether or not you put a book to rest. I don't ever think of it as giving up altogether because you just don't know. But when you get to a point where you say, at this point, I'm not working on this book anymore. I'm putting it off to the side. It is perfectly okay and acceptable, sweet dog, brown eyes, to have a book and just say, this was a book I learned on. I'm not going to keep working on this book, and I'm going to go on to the next book. I have done that. I did that with 4 separate books before publishing.
That must have hurt.
One of those books has since been resurrected and redone. Yay! Right?
Yay, Eileen.
The others, parts of them have been cannibalized for characters or various things. But it is okay to be like, I learned a lot writing that book. It was fun. I just don't want to do it. My example to someone else, because they're like, can't you fix all of them? Is it's sort of like a drawing. Like you draw something and then you realize, okay, that's wrong. And you erase it and you redraw it. It's still not right. So you erase it and you redraw it. And then it's still not right. So you erase it and you redraw. At some point, the paper's kind of crappy.
There's a hole in it where you've erased too much.
Yeah. At some point, you're better off to just pull out a new shiny piece of paper and just start all over, and possibly with a very different picture. So that is okay. That is not losing or failure or anything else. That is learning and moving on. And it is also 100% acceptable to keep revising a book until it's what you want it to be. Again, don't underestimate how many times you can revise in an effort to get where you want it to be. So that is, and I have done this as well, where I have worked a book and worked a book and worked a book until I finally got it where it needed to be. So both of those are okay options. I think part of that decision comes around as, when are you now making yourself unhappy? When is it when you open up that project that you get that sinking feeling, that you feel gross about it, that you don't want to do it? That's maybe the time that you need to put that book. Writing is supposed to be fun. In all honesty, the publishing part will kick your fanny from time to time, but the writing part should be fun. So if the writing part is becoming a painful, awful chore every single time, because writing is not all unicorns and rainbows, but if there are no rainbows and no unicorns, it might be time to try something else.
Well, sometimes just taking a break will also just be fine.
Yeah. Again, it's not saying that you're never going to go back to it, but sometimes it's like, I've just reached a stage where I don't know what else to do with this book. I need to put it to the side and I need to try something else. The other thing that sometimes can happen with this is the submission process. So if you are going traditionally published and you are querying 1 million people and you're getting some fulls, but no one picks it up, if eventually you say, I have queried everyone I can possibly think of,
and
I don't know what else to do.
Query.
Yeah. So one of the things to understand that is that the submission process is about market. It is not about whether or not you have written a good book.
Right.
Those are 2 different things.
What will sell?
What will sell? I have a friend who's written a great book. that is a werewolf kind of horror novel. I've read it. I love it. I think it's really good. But in talking to some agents, they're like, there's just not a big market for kind of that historical horror story.
Yeah. Werewolves are kind of,
out. They're kind of out right now.
But
trendy.
That will change. She just has to wait, right?
But yeah, that is one thing with market is if you do love your book and it's not a case of like, maybe it does need more revision or it needs more change. Maybe it's just the market's not at that spot. Like put it to the side, go do something else, and you never know because the market does turn. Like that's the way it works. So stay tuned and don't get rid of that thing.
Note for friend.
Yes. I have made a point to try and like, but it's hard. I know it's hard for him because he feels like he's submitted this everywhere. Nobody likes it. And it's like, but that's not it. Like, that's not the problem.
No. Yeah. And we tend to take things on personally and think, it's a reflection of us, but
and writing, and writing is personal. Like you have spent months in most cases, sometimes years. Months,
maybe
years.
I'll get more efficient.
Writing a novel, and then if someone's like, I don't want to read that, that's not good. So that is something to just be aware of. So that is my thought process on that.
Sounds good.
So, any questions on the revising, any of those kinds of things?
Yes and no.
Well, let's go with the yes part.
Well, because I always kind of know the answer. I just don't want to, believe the answer.
So go ahead and ask.
And
I will tell you what you already know.
You'll tell me you're very good at that. It's your degree and stuff.
Yeah, I'm smart.
You just pull out what people already knew themselves. I'm having troubles in revising because I enter all these contests and I see that there's a way of having a marketable premise. And I go, oh, well, I could change it this way and it would be more fantastic or marketable. But then another part of me is like, no, that's not the book I want to write. And so there's this little war going on. And then I think, okay, fine, I'm done with that. I know what I want to write. I know what my book is. And then, you wake up in the middle of the night and you go, if I do this, it could kind of do that and still maintain my vision. And by the time you wake up in the morning, you're like, okay, I'm going to do that. And then you're back to, no, I didn't want to. I don't know. Sorry.
I want to hear your internal version of your brain again. That's just great. So what I would say is there are two parts. So if you are trying traditionally publishing, thinking about the marketing end of things can be useful. I encourage people not to think about it while they're writing.
Yeah,
but when revising, it can be useful to sort of be like, what is going on in the market, and is there something that might make this a more hooky commercial book? But fundamentally, oftentimes when you're trying to chase that, you're going to be in trouble anyway, because what that is constantly evolving and changing. So you can, end up chasing a market, which is why people say don't write to the market. It's because by the time you finish your book, it's already moved on. It's doing something else. I do think the more that you're reading, quote unquote, popular commercial fiction, the more you start to internalize what is commercial without even thinking about it.
Right. It's almost like osmosis.
Yeah. You start because you're reading those books, so you know what's happening in those things. And so you're thinking through kind of that stuff. So that is a useful process, I think, is just reading commercial fiction. Ultimately, I always tend to be like, you got to go for your gut.
Mm-hmm.
And
but my gut also wants to be published.
Yes. So it's figuring out where that line is around how much do you change. I mean, I can give one example for myself. So my very first book, Unpredictable, takes place in Canada. And when it was out on submission with publishers, not agents, but with publishers, I was getting a lot of feedback like, nobody wants to read about Canada.
Yeah, darn Canada.
Stupid Canada.
Yeah.
I was like it's some weird backwater. But anyway, so I ended up getting one publisher that came back and was like, we will make a tentative offer if the author is willing to reset the entire book in Seattle.
Oh.
So my agent came to me and was like, are you willing to do that? And that, like, my initial hunch was like, no, like the book takes place in Canada.
No, but,
you know, there's this, there's that. But then I started doing like, does it fundamentally really change the point? Like, it did change the story I wanted to tell, but did it change it fundamentally from what I really wanted to communicate?
Right.
And I was like, I might be willing to do it. So I was actually in the process of making those changes when another publisher came back and liked it the way it was.
Oh, yay.
And let me keep it in Canada. And that's where it did. It eventually went to Berkeley, which is part of Penguin. And, you know, we kept the book in Canada.
Yeah.
Would the book have sold better
if
we had made it a US? Good luck guessing that. Like,
How could you know that? Yeah.
Okay. I have no, maybe. I mean, I think my bigger challenge was I had kind of missed the cusp of chick lit. So it was a humorous kind of romantic, you know, caper kind of slapstick comedy. And those books were kind of on the way out. So I think that was my bigger challenge versus what the actual book was about or where it was placed.
Yeah.
But where that line is for you, I mean, certainly thinking about the market when you're revising is useful because those are the people you're trying to attract: readers, editors, agents. So if you're hearing a lot of things that is like, this book would be quote unquote leveled up if it had a romance in it, or if it had XYZ in it, there's merit to really thinking about that and thinking, you know, first with the gut, like, does that just hijack your story? And if it hijacks your story in the wrong way, like, I think you have to stand firm with your gut and be like, no.
Yeah. But it's not that clear cut of a decision.
but often,
the debate, is it going to level it up or is it going to change it? I can't decide. I'll just send you a little note and I'll ask you and you'll just tell me. No.
Yes. I will just answer yes, no. I mean, I do think for me, sometimes the process, and again, revision is always easier than when you're starting to write a book, because with revision, you already have an outline. In your case, you have a spreadsheet, for God's sakes.
Some people.
Some of those people. So for me, what I would probably start with would be like, okay, let's say someone was saying this would be more commercial if it had a stronger romance subplot.
Right.
So I would start going through and being like, okay, if I was going to add a romance subplot or deepen what's kind of maybe a little bit there, how would I do that? So what would I be adding? What would I be, you know, trying to figure out?
And how would it change the main plot, if it would or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, those sort of things. I haven't thought about the romance subplot. It's very common in YA, so of course.
Yeah.
It is something I think about.
And I mean, I think it's those things or if someone is saying this would be better in third versus first.
No, I have no problems deciding on that one.
Yeah. And, you know, sometimes it's that case of, you know, thinking around like, well, I wrote it this way because that's what felt right, or, you know, all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Like,
no. And I know people have changed their.
People have changed that. They have added points of view. Like, I should have a rotating point of view. Like, romance is one where it is fairly common that you're getting both the hero and the heroine's point of view, or the hero if you're doing, you know, gay romance or something like that, but where you're getting the rotating points of view. I know some people who are writing romance are like, well, I want to stay completely in the heroine's point of view. you can do that. Like, I'm not going to say you can't. I'm just saying, in terms of, remember at the very beginning when we were talking about revision, it was reader expectation.
Right. Which is also the commercial
Yeah.
viability of your story.
So there is something to be said around, is that a reader expectation? And it, you know, if they're going to be expecting something and you're not choosing to deliver it, just to be aware that may cause some challenges.
Yeah.
Because they will
really want to
be
face challenges.
Yeah. And there are some that I think are more or less. So if you're doing a romance and you make the decision that in your case, the characters are not going to end up together, they're not going to get their happily ever after. FYI, you're going to have a lot of readers who are not happy about that.
No.
Because that is kind of like one of those things.
Yeah, for romance.
That they are expecting. And if you're not going to deliver that to them, that's going to cause a challenge. So
I like that face. So
figure
out what you want.
Figure out what you want to do, because you can do it. Like, and there are people who do that. And oftentimes those are sometimes really big breakout books where the person has 100% thwarted that expectation. So again, what is it you want to do? And where do you fall on that line? And, you know, do you feel, you know, comfortable with that? Or do you feel like, no, that's something I'm just not prepared to do? Mm-hmm. So that would be my very long answer to your question.
That's a non-answer.
It's a non-answer. But do spend time thinking about it. Like, don't just jump one way or the other. Like, do spend some time. And I think particularly if there is some very consistent, like, if what they're wanting to do to make it commercial is like a really high reader expectation. So if you're writing a murder mystery and your decision is to not have the bad guy caught at the end, that's a big flaunting of reader expectation.
Right. So you had to either have a very strong reason why you're not doing it, or...
Yeah. But if you're, you know, kind of more playing with something like, oh, this murder mystery would be more marketable if I had an exotic location. Or if I had a twist, because right now twists are the thing in thrillers, right? Like, I want to have a twist and I don't. Like, mine is much more of a traditional Agatha Christie kind of murder mystery. Do I feel okay with that? Those are some things you can kind of plot through and make some decisions about, I think.
Okay.
Other questions?
Other questions. Are we I don't know. I like the finding beta readers at my local high school and librarians.
Yes.
That's cool. I don't know if I'll be brave enough to do that, but
fair enough.
And sending it anonymously kind of to an agent and having them read it feels safer.
You could do that, I guess. That's an option. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know why that feels safer. For other people that would not be safe at all, but
yeah. What am I going to do with you?
I'll have to talk to people eventually, right?
Yeah, basically, like, don't know what to tell you.
I know. No, I don't really have any more questions.
All right.
We covered revision, and we covered beta readers and critique partners. It was a good session. Those things.
I told you I had useful information, darn it.
You did, and you're going to give us a little fancy dancy sheet.
Yes, so I am in theory going to have that. There will be dancing with that sheet. So I will have that in theory end of this week. Okay. So I will make sure that it goes up in the resource room and everybody finds out that it is in fact existing. So they will have it. All right, I'm going to stop recording. Thank you for coming to Happy Hours.